aim of this panel is trying to figure out what drone strikes are and how journalists and other activists or advocates can work on the topic and make some, make them visible and more understandable to the public opinion. And first news, Francesco Vignarca couldn't join us, as previously announced for health reasons. And in case he's watching us on online streaming, ciao, we miss you, get well soon. And today we have Jessica Dorsey here on my right. She's the project officer for PAX, an NGO in the Netherlands, and she's also the coordinator of the European Forum on Armed Drones and a fellow of the International Center for Counterterrorism in The Hague in the Netherlands. Then we will have Laura Silvia Battaglia, a freelance journalist from Italy who lives in Italy, in between Italy and Yemen. She has been contributing for several publications, including the American Lebanese video news agency Transterra, the Turkish news agency TRT World, RSI in Switzerland, and La Stampa, Venire, among many others, publications in Italy and in Europe. Then we have Jack Searle here on my left. He's a senior reporter at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. They do excellent work on drone strikes, and is going to present part of their work on the covert drone war. So I think we will get started right away. Each one has 10 minutes for a presentation, then we will have a few more minutes for Q&A from you guys, from the audience, and we will try to highlight the discussion. So Jessica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, everyone, as Philip said, for coming out this morning. Just for full disclosure, I'm not a journalist, unlike many of you here. I have a background in law. I work for a Dutch NGO called PAX. And so I'm going to talk to you a bit about drone strikes and the legal framework for transparency and accountability today, and also a bit about the work that we're doing within the European Forum on Armed Drones. I'll kind of take you through some general remarks and talk about something that we find very integral to the work that we're doing, which is the right to information. I will talk a bit about the European complicity on drone strikes, because often we think about it as something that the United States may be doing, and to a much lesser extent other states, but I want to sort of dispel some of that, those myths, because European states are, in fact, acting quite complicit in many strikes. And then also talk about how we're trying to change that. And one example within the European Union at this current moment, I'll give a bit more information about that, as well as talk about our European Forum at the end. So general remarks. Essentially, we try to do a number of things with regard to increasing transparency about drone strikes and increasing accountability from states who are carrying out strikes, in order to give victims of drone strikes the access to justice that they are entitled to. It's problematic, though, obviously, because governments, as you all know, are not so forthcoming with information about strikes, where they take place, against whom, what the legal framework is, and we're trying within our forum to push for that kind of accountability and transparency. But oftentimes we have to rely on work done by investigative journalists or whistleblowers. And what I want to say about that is that whistleblowing is very helpful to our work, because we are able to get information we otherwise wouldn't, but it is a symptom of a broken system. The idea is that we shouldn't have to rely on whistleblowers or investigative journalism to get the information we're looking for. This is something that states should be providing. So, but as long as they're not providing it, we do have to rely on whistleblowers. And that has to do with what I've just mentioned here. So whistleblowers do step in to fill the gaps. Many of you know very well that investigative journalists or whistleblowers are putting themselves at great risks in order to get that information to us. So that's also a symptom of the broken system. Nobody should have to put themselves at risk to get information that is that should be coming from governments themselves. This is the kind of information that governments should be disclosing with respect to drone strikes. This is what we're trying to push them to disclose, but the number of strikes, their policies and practice, what kind of legal framework that they're using in order to kind of justify the uses of force in various theaters. When there are casualties, an investigation is necessary into that, and then disclosure of information like the names of victims, the locations of those strikes, and how they were investigated. These are the kinds of things that the public is entitled to. So we push for that from governments, but again, they're not very forthcoming. So we have to rely oftentimes on whistleblowers, leaked information, or investigations carried out by journalists. And speaking of broken systems, okay. One quick thing about the right to information. This is a lot of text on the slide, I'm very aware of that. But what I want to say about the right to information, oftentimes governments are hiding behind the idea that, well, if we give you this information you're asking for about the number of strikes, where they're located, then that's prejudice to or infringing upon national security. You hear that all the time, almost ad nauseum. And so what I want to say about that, the idea is that national security card is played way too often. There are legitimate security interests that a state can use that excuse, national security, but those are extraordinarily limited circumstances. So what this comes from the Tishwani principles, the idea that you can only restrict information to the public if this set of information, so that is prescribed by law, necessary to a democratic society to protect a legitimate national security interest, and the law provides for adequate safeguards against abuse. And so I think I would just urge us not to keep accepting that idea that, oh, well, it's national security, so therefore this information, we cannot obtain it. We need to push back on governments, and we try to do that within our work to, national security cannot be a blanket that's thrown over everything related to drones. People have a right to information. The public has a right to know. Victims have a right to justice, and that's what this is really about at the end of the day. So, kind of zooming in a bit into the work that we do at the European Forum, that European states, even though only the UK at this point is running armed drone strikes, there are other states with drones that carry out surveillance missions. So the complicity or the assistance that those states are providing is also something we're looking very critically at. Of course, US being the largest user, they've set the standard in terms of secrecy, and we're seeing a lot of the European governments kind of taking that over. The UK is one good example of that. They've kind of adopted the US's standard for imminent threat, who poses an imminent threat, which is worrying from a legal perspective. And we're watching to see what other governments are going to do within the European context. But what I think is important to highlight is that currently, and I think some of my panelists will talk a bit more in depth about it, but in Germany, the Ramstein Air Force Base is being used to run missions out of. The United States is using that Air Force Base. The Germans then are therefore assisting in that. Sigonella Air Force Base is being used to run missions in Libya and other places, and I think that that's something. In the very beginning, the Italian government was saying that these are going to be only missions to do with self-defense uses of force, but now that has shifted significantly, and the US is using offensive uses of force running out of Sigonella as well. So we're trying to look into the complicity issues surrounding that. And one final note about Dutch intelligence. The Dutch are accused of sharing information with the United States, which was then used allegedly to carry out 2 targeted killings in Somalia. So there's an ongoing lawsuit in the Netherlands related to this. So this is what we're talking about when we say that this is not just a US problem. The European states are currently assisting in these strikes, and as drone use and acquisition of these technologies proliferates, more European countries will be using these as well. So I think going back to the information that we're receiving, because it's fragmented, the nature of whistleblowers, you can't ever have a comprehensive picture. And what that does is, it doesn't allow you to have a whole picture, which is important when you're talking about justice writ large. It also undermines accountability and the legitimacy of operations that states are running. So the idea is that if we don't have a full picture, we can't, as the public, know exactly what kind of uses of force are legal and what are not, and how to then deal with the accountability angle. And then at the end of the day, once again, it deprives victims of their right to an effective remedy. So victims cannot fully have justice if they don't have a clear picture of who was targeted and why, for example. Okay, so what can we do about it? So that's kind of a doomsday scenario, as are a lot of things with respect to drone strikes. But what can we do about it? Right now, there's a process going on at the European Union level. The European Parliament has recently commissioned a study that's being finalized in the next month. I'm asking myself because I'm the one who authored this report. And it's towards an EU common position on the use of armed drones. In 2014, the European Parliament came out with passed a resolution to address issues dealing with drone strikes, and they called for a common position. Unfortunately, nobody really picked up on that call, so in 2016, they reiterated that in a different resolution and said we need this common position. So the idea that we have a legal framework within the European Union to govern the use of force with respect to drone strikes. Again, nobody picked it up, so the Parliament commissioned me to write this study. In this study, I have developed a model common position that I've put forth to the Parliament and then on to the Council, hopefully that's the next step, asking for a clarification of legal framework from various states, increasing transparency and accountability. Again, that prevention of assistance in unlawful drone strikes, so looking at the Dutch with their shared intelligence, or the use of Sigonella, or surveillance missions that are being run and then intelligence being shared, or satellites that are being shared. We need to look at that angle, and also to control for proliferation. Those are the suggestions I've put forth. This paper, again, shall be published within a month. And then we will, within our forum, our European Forum on Armed Drones, we will take that then to various capitals, engage with governments to ask them to start clarifying their own policies and procedures. One last note then about that European Forum. Essentially, we're a civil society network of organizations, and we promote human rights, respect for the rule of law, disarmament, and conflict prevention. These are the things, maybe very similar to what I just addressed within this context of the Parliament paper, but the idea is that we need governments to be clearer on their policies. So our organizations take it upon themselves to engage with governments at the national, European, and also international level. We work often in European fora as well as at the UN. And, so that's just in case you weren't aware of the work that we're doing there. I also have some literature about it, about the call to action, what exactly it is that we do. If you're interested, please come find me afterwards. And then the network, we have right now currently 25 organizations that have ratified the call to action, but we have over 90 members from all kinds of different European countries. This is just the selection of our organizations working together. And for that, I think that sketched, I hope, an overview, and I'll pass it on now to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for this overview. And next is Laura, and she will talk about Yemen in details and drone strikes there. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Philip. Thank you, Jessica, for this interesting insight into the necessity of kind of accountability and asking transparency to governments. Well, I will give you a specific insight into Yemen because it's the usual place for me and exactly how it's possible to work on the ground on this topic. And first of all, I have a short video. It's a trailer, 1 minute, and it's a trailer will be included in an interactive ebook that I will release on the 28th of this month for Informant. He's an Italian publisher, and the idea is to give you a specific insight about what's going on in Yemen. And then I will show you exactly what I found on the ground there in 2014. And something is possible to say about the latest airstrike happened in 2017, so this year, at the end of January. And I'd like to tell you something about the latest one because had a very strong impact on Trump administration.
I was in the program for 5 years and 5 days, from April 12th, 2006 until April 17th, 2011. I flew in Yemen, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So I got to see people live their daily lives in and out. I killed 13 people directly with Hellfire missile strikes in Iraq and Afghanistan. No strikes in other places, and I participated in missions that ended up with over 2,300 individuals killed in the total time that I was in the service. I've seen weddings, I've heard stories and seen videos of weddings being struck by Hellfire missiles. That's pretty disturbing, considering that weddings are supposed to be a celebration of life and funerals are supposed to be a mourning of the loss of life, and so we were directly violating these sacred rituals.
So this video tries to summarize the activity of one of our whistleblowers, and he technically didn't kill anyone in Yemen, but he did a number of airstrikes there, following and watching. And the idea is, of course, to drag people who will have the contact with the interactive ebook to original footage and real stories. Plus, of course, a number of data, and I will use as source the Bureau of Investigative Journalists, so I just want to mention that. The numbers you see there about the airstrikes in Yemen are updated at the end of 2016. And so that's the number of civilian killed that was counted by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. I just give you 2 days because these 2 days were really important for Yemen, the civilians of Yemen, in considering understanding drone strikes as something that really changed also the position of civilians to the government, to the Yemeni government. In December 2013, in the area of Rada, which is a city was captured by the rebels of the north, the Houthis, but before wasn't, happened an airstrike, and the airstrike killed 12 civilians. The strike happened typically in a wedding. And after the airstrike, I think, and after 3 months, the most prominent tribal leader of the area, he declared that the tribal people of the area, they didn't want to join again, still join the government. At the time, the government was the new government who was supposed to conduct the country to a different time. So at that time, the president was Hadi, who's still the president right now. And I met this guy in a very complex meeting in Sana'a with different tribal leaders. And he told me clearly, well, we are not with Al-Qaeda now, but we are thinking about it. And it couldn't be very clear, of course, because he was talking with a journalist and he knew that will release this sentence, he said. But after what happened in Rada, also in all areas where happened other airstrikes, something really changed. In this book, you will find interesting evidence of what happened very close to Sana'a, in the area of Sanhan, which is a village pretty close to Sana'a, is a rural area. And I just want to show you, it's a raw footage, but I think it's really pretty clear because exactly here, okay, this is the house where was living a guy, and I will show you the guy in the pictures. It was, at that time, completely against the president for personal reasons. And, but the guy was suspected of activities, Al-Qaeda activities, and of course all the area was watched constantly by drones. What happened that, I will go exactly a little bit far. What happened that the guy was driving, he was with his driver, and the drone exactly pointed on the car and killed the guy with his driver. This guy you see now is his brother, and the body of the guy was completely fired, and pieces of the body were splattered into this wall. And okay, and you see here some evidence of the damage. This is the place where the guy was killed, was the car there. And we went there with an NGO who tries to understand what are the consequences of drone strikes, especially in terms of mental disorder for children, for women. So we distributed a survey to understand what are the consequences. And also, children answer to the questions. This is the landscape. What you see there, just for people who are not, you never were in Yemen, this is the Ghat. It's not, it's a tree. From this tree come kind of local drug, and all the people, they die to chewing this. Anyway, so what happened, then I show you something. This boy and Khalil, it was the real witness of what happened, and he was completely shocked. And he told us that he has constant intrusive memories. He always dreamed about, airplanes over his head. He has fear, of course. But by the way, at the end, he told something, kind of truth. He said, okay, I don't think they will come again to bomb this place because they just killed the only Qaedist we had here. So it was really interesting. Okay, this is the guy. Anyway, but what happened from the other hand, the guy has a driver at the service, and the driver has 5 children. And the widow, she needs, of course, money. So she received an offer, and she accepted the offer. At the same time, the idea of the people in the village was that Al-Qaeda maybe is not good anymore because they can't protect us too much. And so the family decided to change. Those are the two killed. To change, and those are the children of the driver, to change in ISIS. And they sent the older son of the one who was killed in Syria, and they at the end decided to paint, as you see here, the flag of ISIS on the walls, and to be, to be part of what we call Wilaya Sana'a, which is the provinces, that Islamic State is divided in provinces, and the province of Islamic State in Yemen has two provinces. One is Wilaya Sana'a, and the other one is Wilaya Aden. And so that's what I found on the ground. Children are, of course, very upset. And in general, any foreign journalist who goes there, they are not so very confident, but my position is a little bit different because I'm of Yemeni, and it's different. But by the way, so the point is that on the ground we have the evidence that an airstrike, even though it's very well done, I'm sorry to say that, but in this case they killed only 2 people and not 15 or 13, has a consequence, and the consequence is under our eyes. I mean, we can see Absul on the ground. For us was really very surprising because we didn't think to find signs of the presence of ISIS there. We were thinking there was still an area of Al-Qaeda. And this happened in 2014. And then after the presence of ISIS increased in Yemen, and we had a suicide bomber in October, and then different suicide bombers at the beginning of 2015, and then everything was messed up in the country. Okay, this is, you can see clearly the house of the driver, and this is another brother of the one who was killed. Anyway, and here you can see maybe the effects of drone attack after several years. This is a car, there was the brother of this guy who actually is the head of an NGO, a local NGO, and it was real civilian casualties. His brother was, in a street, and he has to been picked up by a car. Somebody passed by, and he went into the car, and the car was targeted, and all the people in the car dead. This is an example on the ground, and so you can find here, but in Pakistan and Afghanistan, a lot of similar stories, as our researchers, they know. And just want to say something. This was happening in a couple of years. I mentioned Rada in 2013. This is 2014. But it's interesting to know what happened in the latest strike, their strike of 29th of January. And if you are interested in this, you can go also to read the report of Iona Craig on The Intercept. She's an amazing colleague. She did a very good job there. And we're in the area of Al-Baida, which is an area that we know is a tribal area, and there are different people who join Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Exactly in Al-Ghaib happened something really strange. I mean, something that was said by Trump was a successful operation, where 30 Navy SEALs of the 6th team, they went there, and they opened the fire against the people of the place. They said officially that they were looking for devices like computers or other stuff. What happened and what we saw on the ground is that were killed 6 women, 10 children, 120 animals, including goats and donkeys. And at the same time, when the Navy SEALs they went in, helicopters surrounded the area, and drones in the days before, of course, were monitoring the area. What happened that basically they were looking for a guy, and they were looking for this guy for a lot of years. And because the house that was targeted is the house of Abdul Rauf al-Dahab. And al-Dahab is a relative of one of the most prominent and famous American Qaidists, was Anwar al-Awlaki, the one who was killed in 2011. So, and the crazy thing here is that in the house was his 8-year-old daughter, Nawar, and the killing of Nawar, and I can address that before. Drone strikes, they killed also the other sons of Anwar, really shake the public opinion in Yemen. Because people, they really know that there are drone airstrikes. Sometimes they can accept the idea that Qaidis could be defeated by drones, of course, if they are not close to the ideology, but the idea to include in these operations children, women, animals is really bad. And the attack of the 29th of 2017 right now is something that, if you consider the environment of Yemen and the war is going on, basically gave a very strong hand to the people who are against US, against the Saudi intervention, against the war, and against also the official government. So the consequences of this attack were really, really, really bad. Another point to address, and then I give the floor to the next speaker, is that before doing this, Americans just considered the environment. When it happened, the attack in the night, people of the village, they was thinking in the beginning that maybe were Houthis, because the people of the village are Qaeda people, and they fought for a long time with the Houthis. And then Houthis, who are the rebels on the north, they took Rada, which is the closer city. So when happened attack in the night, at the beginning they thought they were Houthis, but when they saw the flashlight of the Navy SEALs, then they understood they were Americans. And so this operation also increases the anger between the factions, and the consequences are really, really bad for the conflict itself. So actually, I think there's an investigation still going on after the amazing work that Iona did on the ground, and I can say that the matter of her strikes in Yemen is still a big matter of concern for everybody and for all the people living in Yemen and work also in Yemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, for your presentation and your witnessing on the ground from Yemen. Next speaker is Jack Searle from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. He will speak about the work they're doing monitoring drone strikes. The floor is yours, Jack.
Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you, Laura, for sharing some extraordinary sort of primary source material in the fruits of your work in Yemen, which I'll get onto in a second. But good morning. Thank you for coming on the nicest day yet to listen to us talk about possibly the most depressing subject here. This is the death of civilians and children in far-flung corners of the world. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism it's a non-profit, philanthropically funded organization. We've been going since 2010. When we set up, we sort of our first sort of big hit was with the Iraq war logs with WikiLeaks, And shortly after that, we started doing drones, which was a sort of a bit of a departure for us, but essentially, the then counterterrorism advisor and most recent CIA director, John Brennan, said that over the course of about 10 months, the US hadn't killed a civilian in its counterterrorism strikes, which, was red rag to a bull as far as a journalist is concerned. Are you sure you've not killed any civilians? Are you absolutely sure? Because we're going to find out. Unfortunately, and as has been sort of discussed already, there is not really much of a public record of drone strikes. There are a couple of organizations in the US that were doing monitoring work, but we couldn't quite replicate their results. We didn't fully understand their methodology. We felt we would be more comfortable if we started collecting data for ourselves. Essentially, we'd seen anecdotal reports of civilian casualties from strikes in Pakistan, from Reuters and from the BBC, as well as from local news outlets. But we needed something more substantial, something that we could really present as a full body of evidence that's, all-encompassing. So we started collecting reports of strikes. We started collecting news reports, and I haven't actually done a count, but I'm sure there's more than thousands of news reports now providing sort of source material for our databases of drone strikes. But we started aggregating all this information together and started tabulating it. We set up spreadsheets and we coded for minimum number of people killed, maximum number of people killed, minimum civilians, maximum, and just developed from sort of qualitative information a quantitative data set. This process sort of became like self-perpetuating, snowballing. Each time we find a report of a strike, that would lead us to another report of a strike. And we're going back in time. Bear in mind, this is sort of 2010, 2011. We're going back in time all the way back to 2002 in these news reports. And suddenly we're finding that the drone war is, back in sort of 2004, was also spreading out into other countries. It wasn't just Pakistan and Yemen, there was also Somalia. And it became an enormous task, an enormous labor. Which we now can present to you. I'm very pleased to announce, well, it's not an announcement, but re-announce that our data is now accessible through a Flash new API. So if you go to the Bureau of Investigates.com, you'll be able to play around with our numbers with a much more interesting tool than just a Google spreadsheet. And essentially, the purpose of this exercise wasn't just to sort of develop a data set for other journalists to use, though it's thrilling that they do, and civil society to use. But it was to use this to guide our investigative work. So we then say, okay, we've got this period of time that John Brennan has said, we've killed no civilians, so we're going to find every report of a civilian casualty in Pakistan during this period, and we're going to get people on the ground, and we're going to go and find their families, and we're going to go find photographs of them, we're going to get their names and their ages, and we're going to then use that to demonstrate the how John Brennan had perhaps been economical with the actuality. We also, in the course of developing the spreadsheets, discovered the CIA had been using this rather dubious tactic, which has been dubbed double taps or follow-up strikes, which is where essentially they will. We were seeing reports of people telling local journalists, they hit this house, and then when we were all picking through the rubble to try and find survivors and bodies, they hit it again. We found numerous instances of this, and we found numerous instances of this rather indiscriminate tactic of killing civilians. Now, you see, the premise of this, as far as the CIA is concerned, is that if you're hitting a Taliban house in a Taliban area or an Al-Qaeda house in an Al-Qaeda area, the people who rush to pick through the rubble, the first responders, so to speak, probably going to be Al-Qaeda and Taliban as well, so you get more bang for your buck. However, these armed groups, as I'm sure many of you know, and if you don't, live amongst the civilian population. They will lodge in houses belonging to civilians living in these areas. They will go from house to house to make sure that their location is not fixed in the same place each night, but they will use the sort of tradition of hospitality in these countries to spend the night. And if you're hitting a Taliban target who's staying in a civilian house, you're going to create civilian casualties. I'm going to move on quickly because we're running out of time, but if anybody's got any questions about the sort of the process that we go through, then do come up to me afterwards or stick your hand up later. I'm very quickly going to talk about journalists and how important and wonderful you all are to our work, especially people who go on the ground to do field research like Laura. We have now become a source. We are sort of mixing investigative journalism with civil society work. We are now a data provider to people, which is not what we expected to be, but it has happened to us. And that would be utterly impossible without civil society activists and journalists, and especially journalists in countries like Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, where I think it goes without saying it's quite dangerous to work as a journalist, especially as a national of that country, and especially in areas like the tribal areas of Pakistan. So these people are fearless. They're essential to providing us with the information that we can then use, we can then aggregate and sum together to try and present as a degree of transparency in the absence of official transparency, so that people like Jessica can hold the US government to account, and people can fully understand what's actually being done, or understand our best impression of what's actually being done in these countries. There's a sort of an interesting parallel here. Essentially what the US is doing is, through this remote control form of warfare, is dislocating or keeping at bay the danger. Now, drone strikes are not sort of the precise, clean system that people might have you believe. They don't just cause death and destruction to the people who are being targeted and killed, and they don't also cause a great deal of harm to the people who are operating them, as I imagine we might hear in a minute. But when you've got this sort of this imposition onto a country, this system that's affecting a local population, that population often will try and find the nearest target to retaliate, to try and get revenge. And they can't do it to the US because they're not even in the plane that's flying over them. They're thousands of miles away in the Nevada desert. So the next best thing is the local security forces, the Pakistani police, the Pakistani military, the Yemeni government officials and Yemeni police and so forth. And they become the target of people's righteous indignation, either through protesting and cutting power lines and blocking streets, as has happened in Yemen frequently, or just by getting murdered by the Taliban and so forth, and by infuriated local people. So I think that's an important point to make as well. The parallel, therefore, is that we're also doing remote journalism. We are so wholly reliant on the people who operate in these dangerous places, and through our colleagues who go on the ground to investigate. So never forget that the work that we do in Europe and in the UK is maybe devoid of risk, but it's certainly built on the labours of people who take considerable risks. How am I doing for time? A few more minutes. Okay. Well, ask me about findings and the consequence and what we've discovered about these drone strikes and questions. I will quickly just say that I think it will come as no surprise to anybody here that the US drone campaign since 2002 has been an unbridled success. And we know it's been a success because President Obama, before he started bombing ISIS in Iraq and Syria, said that the US campaign in Yemen had been a great success, and he wanted to replicate that in Iraq and Syria. And I think we can probably agree it is a success if you take a very, very narrow definition of what is successful. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula have been, with relative success carrying out attacks on the United States. I mean, the plots may have failed, but they got the bombs onto aeroplanes and so forth. Al-Qaeda in Pakistan had quite a clear track record of being able to carry out horrific attacks around the world. And Al-Shabaab in Somalia, as is clear from the attacks in Kenya and Uganda and so forth, is also a transnational group. And the US drone strikes have been successful in keeping those attacks away from the USA. They've been successful in keeping them in the countries where these people are operating. But Al-Qaeda's leadership in Pakistan was decimated. They were, if you read the bin Laden papers that were discovered at Abbottabad, and you'll see how difficult it was for them to operate with the drones. But Al-Qaeda's still there. They've just changed their focus. They're now Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, and they're now carrying out attacks in Pakistan and India and Bangladesh. And they're based in Afghanistan. AQAP is still in Yemen to a very large extent, as well as ISIS. It's now very much embedded into the insurgency and the civil war. And there's a very good paper that was published recently pointing out that Al-Qaeda is actually stronger than ever in Yemen. And in Somalia, Al-Shabaab's still there. Al-Shabaab is still capable of carrying out horrific attacks in the capital, Mogadishu, almost at will. It may not necessarily be as capable of carrying out transnational attacks in Kenya and other places, but we have no real, we have no real way of knowing until they actually do it. They just may not have the capacity of attacking the Europe or the West. So a success, but perhaps a qualified success. We have also seen a decline in civilian casualties, and I'm going to finish on this point. We have also seen a profound decline in civilian casualties from US drone strikes from a peak of sort of 2009, 2010. I think there are many reasons for that. One is that the systems that they're using have become more accurate and more precise. The other is that I think the people operating them have become better and more adept at using these systems, and they have a better understanding. But I also think that it's because the US government brought in tighter rules and restrictions on their use, and that is thanks to the pressure that was brought by journalists and civil society organizations as represented on this panel, I think. So we have had, I think it's fair to say there has been a tangible impact in reducing civilian casualties. Though that said, I don't think there's any chance that the drone strikes themselves are going to stop. So we may only have made this forever war slightly more sanitized. And maybe that's a win, I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. And I'm going to focus on one issue that has been already touched by the other speakers this morning. And okay, probably. Here we go. And I'm going to speak about what has been so far the contribution from whistleblowers in the understanding of drone strikes. And me, myself, I'm a researcher and a journalist who has been working in this field for a few years now. And I've been dragged into the drone strikes team starting from my interest in whistleblowing. And part of what I'm going to discuss today has been included in a work that I've been doing for the Italian Coalition for Civil Rights and Freedoms, who is also part of the European Forum on Armed Drones that Jessica presented before. And whistleblowing, why does it matter for drone strikes, and what's a possible contribution we can get from there? So this is a typical academic definition of whistleblowing as the disclosure by organization members of illegal, immoral, or legitimate practices that have been done under the control of the organization that they have part of. And whistleblowers are there to provide evidence or elements in understanding this acts. And this is what happened actually with drone strikes. And we live in a time where whistleblowing is more and more relevant, and the examples of Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning are there to remind us how powerful whistleblowers can be in actually change things and provide elements for change. And this has been, of course, also related to the role of technology, of encryption, of source protection, and also this will come up again while discussing whistleblowing and drone strikes. And I've gathered here some of the transparency issue. All of these have been already touched, but I would like to mention a few things. So what's the problem for drone strikes from the perspective of a journalist who is supposed to investigate and cover or monitor what's going on there? Is that there is a lack of data, lack of official data and numbers explaining like a magnitude of the phenomenon. And the White House has been releasing data only in 2016 after many delays and many announcements. It seemed like it was never going to happen, but in the summer of 2016, they released data which were simply aggregated, so there was no way actually to understand what this number were referring to. So how many strikes, where, when, how many people killed. It was simply very cold numbers that gave no big overview about what's going on. And there is also, in my opinion, a problem with definitions, because victims or combatants are very vague terms. And for instance, the official numbers of the White House said that a number in between 2,372 or 2,581 people were killed, but these people are considered combatants, so militants or people actually fighting. But there is no clear definition about how they are defined in this way, and what's the difference between civilians, which apparently are only 64, but we will get back there. And this lack of data and evidence is given by the fact that drones operations are under the veil of the same secrecy of other anti-terrorism policies from the US. So there is lack of evidence, as it was for digital surveillance, for instance. So everything goes under the umbrella of anti-terrorism, and that's a very secret umbrella to be under. And there is also a problem with overclassification, which has been ongoing in the past years. The Obama administration has done a few positive steps in terms of transparency, but despite claiming to be the most transparent administration ever, it has been completely the opposite when it comes to drone strikes. So it is safe to say, I guess, and we can all agree on this panel, that drone strikes are basically conducted in secret. And this is also a problem when it comes to accountability, because it is extremely difficult to be accountable on what's going on, to identify who is responsible for civilians' deaths, like those that Laura spoke about a few minutes ago. And also, other countries are involved in this. In Italy is involved in this, Germany is involved in this, and I'm afraid there is very little public debate about these topics. In Italy in particular, we have one of the biggest air bases in Sicily, but basically we don't talk about drone strikes and how we might be involved in that. And the Freedom of Information Access Law has been playing an important part in the US. The ACLU has been able, for instance, to get documents about the government's policy on how the world framework for drone strikes is operated, but that is not enough. There is still a lack of elements and visibility to what is going on, and whistleblowers have been playing a major part in this. This is simply to give you an idea of what is missing. So Jack's organization, the Bureau of Investigative Journalists, estimates that in between 2009 and 2015, I guess, there have been 325 civilians' deaths, while the official numbers from the White House only say 64. So it's kind of extremely different. The numbers are also at odds with those of the New American Foundation and Long War Journal. So something is missing in the whole picture. And whistleblowers have been trying to fill the gap. There has been definitely a debate in the US in particular about all this secrecy around drone strikes. There is a selection completely unscientific, simply some random Google search about what have been journalists saying about this secrecy. So definitely it has been an issue, it has been a topic. Journalists and activists have been debating about the problem, but despite some few positive steps, the release of the numbers past summer was definitely a good sign, a troubled good sign, but probably something is going on, probably it's not, and the election of Trump definitely escalated the problem on a next much higher level, so I'm afraid it's going to be worse. And whistleblowers, this is a quote from Jesselyn Radak. She's one of the most courageous attorneys who's been defending whistleblowers for decades now. And I've interviewed her for a story, and she said, what's at the core with whistleblowers and drone strikes? She said that the US government has been trying to portray drones operation as clean and not so violent, while whistleblowers have been saying the contrary. They have been truth teller in saying what is really going on, and it is definitely different. So when it comes to whistleblowers, who are there? The first one it's quite famous. Edward Snowden himself provided some evidence about drone strikes and how digital surveillance is involved in the programs. And in October 2013, the Washington Post, in a story by Barton Gellman, provided evidence of how the National Security Agency is also involved in the organization of the drone strikes. And the case of Hassan Gul, who was one of the bin Laden's associates, there was evidence of how they got him through surveillance and cyber espionage tools. And this is kind of systematic. So signal intelligence and digital surveillance are definitely deeply involved also in drone strikes. But there are a few other people, Brandon Bryant, who we also saw the video, Michael Lass and Stephen Lewis, they are all former sensor operators, which means that drone pilots, so to say. And together with them, Chan Westmoreland, Lisa Ling, and Christopher Heron has been speaking about what they were doing. So they are all former either civilians or soldiers involved with the drone programs, and they have been telling their stories. They have been involved in different tasks. And for instance, they have been very cautious in disclosing information in order not to break the law and not being in trouble as Edward Snowden is. But they have been providing evidence and elements that were missing from the whole picture. So they, for instance, have been discussing the details about the culture of drone strikes, what's kind of the ethos and the feelings that have been there. So for instance, they say that children were frequently regarded as fun-sized terrorists. And the feeling, this is a quote, precise quote, is that feeling like killing ants. When you kill one, you can just simply stop. And they've also been discussing their psychological consequences of killing people from a distance. So they're sitting in an airbase in the US, the drones flies on the other side of the world, and then pushing a button and a missile starts and someone gets killed. It could sound like sanitized and safe, but it's not. It's like playing a video game. But they had been having heavily psychological consequences and post-traumatic stress as well, and they've been open about that. And they've been involved in public hearings and investigation in parliaments and other organizations in the US, in the United Nations, and in Germany, for instance. They've been writing open letters to Obama and the heads of the intelligence in the US. And what's very interesting, they've been involved also in some documentaries where they've been telling their story and provided other elements. So Drone in 2014 and National Board was being released last year. You can hear them speaking about their experiences. And this is very interesting because they've been giving evidence and data in some cases that were missing to the whole picture. The most interesting case when it comes to whistleblowing and drone strikes are the drone papers that were published at the end of 2015 by The Intercept, the news outlet that Glenn Greenwald founded after the Snowden revelation in 2013. They got a massive leak by a whistleblower who is still anonymous, someone who was sitting in the intelligence community and he was involved in the drone strikes in the US, gave to The Intercept lots of data, classified data about how drone strikes are organized, how drone strikes are decided, and how drone strikes are conducted. This helped a lot in shaping our understanding of how drone strikes are having an impact in the countries where they are deployed. And of course, even the drone papers, although they're based on hard evidence, are still not enough. We have many more elements about how drone strikes are operated in Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia, but it's different from Pakistan, for instance. So the message is that, yeah, whistleblowers have been there, they have been provided information, but the whole image is still blurred, it's still not completely defined, and it is like a puzzle of elements that are coming in from different sources, like the excellent monitoring work that the Bureau and other organizations are doing, the impressive and courageous work that journalists are doing on the ground, like Laura is doing, and at the same time also what advocates like Jessica have been doing in these years, have been trying to fill the gap. I think that still a lot of elements are missing, and next step is try to ask for more transparency from governments and being probably even more aggressive as journalists in asking that to happen. So I think I've done here with my presentation, so we have a few minutes still for questions, so I would love to open the mic. How many minutes? 5 minutes. Okay, so definitely who has a question, raise your hand and ask who would like you to answer. Thanks.
I was wondering what would be the difference between one of those quote-unquote successful drone strikes in Yemen, which we saw, and the difference between just sending troops in there, basically killing the same person, but in person. Would that make a difference in the reaction that the people in that village would show?
Yeah. I think we can collect a few questions. So I guess this one is for you, Laura. Okay. One here in the front.
Hello, my name is Anna. I'm from the web magazine Volunteers. My question is about actually the legal interpretation, because we saw the principle, some guidelines about allowing these drone strikes. But still, I was wondering about the interpretation, like what is national security? That's, I think, the main point. And also, one principle is that there is the need of a law, like a law should be there. But I was wondering, well, a government can just make a law right away in case it wants to act. So yeah, that's my question.
I think we can get one more, if there is one. No.
The difference basically is when Navy SEALs, they came to the village in Al-Baida, they were looking for Abdul Rahman al-Dahab physically because they missed him for 4 times. And they were also looking for devices as well. The point is, actually, the investigation is going on is why at the end they didn't took the devices. They said they should do it. That was the official answer. And they didn't find Abdul Rahman. And it's an interesting point because it seems that he went out of the village 6 hours before the raid started. I want just to address that the helicopters seems helicopters from Emirates troops. So seems that was like, an intelligence stuff that maybe said something to people in the village, or we don't know exactly. In terms of reaction, an airstrike and a drone strike has, if the pilots, they can and they want, have a less impact. As I said before, I'm sorry to say, very well done drone airstrike, but when you kill exactly your target and you don't kill others, but, military terms, it's just quite well done job. I'm sorry to say that, but anyway, it's the target. But when you go into village physically and you have 30 Navy SEALs, it's a physical invasion. So, of course, means that they have kind of permission to go on the ground, even though you need the permission of the government also to fly with your drones. And we need to underline this. One of the reasons why also the terrorism is so spread in these areas, that the government, they allow all this. So, so I can say that actually the reaction in Al-Baida was really stronger than before because of the context. The typical reaction is the people, they arm themselves. As I said before, they go to suicide in somewhere else. And in tribal terms, if somebody do something against your family, where you need to clean this blood with other blood. So the consequence is clear.
The other question was going to answer that. Maybe you, Jessica, I don't know. Yeah.
Thanks for your questions. Really good questions about what kind of law then we're asking governments to come up with. We're not asking anybody to invent anything new. We're asking them for clarification on the law that already exists. So with respect to drone strikes, we have bodies of law. So the UN Charter talks about when force is allowed to be used and when it's not. There's a blanket prohibition on the use of force, except in extraordinarily limited circumstances, and oftentimes you hear the term self-defense. But that is a very narrow exception to the blanket prohibition. So when they use the word self-defense, we're asking governments to clarify exactly against whom, on what grounds, what's your interpretation of the limits of self-defense? Is it preemptive self-defense, like the Bush Doctrine that we've all in the international community have rejected by and large? Or is it preventive self-defense? How are we, we're just asking for statements about the interpretation of law that already exists. So that's about using force. So when force is used, then does it amount to an armed conflict? And if so, then the guiding body of law is international humanitarian law. If it does not amount to an armed conflict, we're talking about human rights law, where the use of lethal force is almost never okay. So in that sense, we're asking really just to spell out, and that's why this idea that this somehow encroaches upon national security, to touch on your first part of your question, it's a bit absurd, because we're just asking you to lay out what your legal interpretation is. We're not asking for secrets. We're not asking for, although it would be handy to have the target list, we're not asking for that. We're asking for you to, government, please spell out your legal framework. From a lawyer's perspective, we're asking just for legal memos. And what we've received so far, even through the Freedom of Information Acts, it's been great that the ACLU and other organizations have been able to obtain some parts of those legal documents, but they're just absolutely inadequate. In law school, they wouldn't even pass the first-year law exam. It's absurd. And that's what, we can look back at the Obama administration and say thank you in some respects for coming out with some sort of policy guidelines, but I think it's dangerous to do that because, they're policy guidelines. They will be rolled back by the Trump administration. We've seen it happening already. And they were also not good enough. So the idea that we're holding up the Obama standards as some sort of legitimate gold standard is also quite dangerous. We need more, we need better, we need European governments to come out with it, we need the US to come out with it, though I don't have high expectations for our orange friend.
Jessica, we have to close down before they send the drone strikes on us. Okay. And thanks everyone for coming out this morning. Thanks Jessica, Jack, Laura, the volunteers and the interpreters down there. Thanks a lot and enjoy your day. Bye.
No, io l'ho cancellato le mie, okay. Però nel cestino. Piaciuto? Voglio svuotare il cestino. Tu sai svuotare un cestino di un PC? È un PC, porca vacca.
Dunque, quindi non hai il Finder, fammi pensare.
No, sono dentro il cestino, ma non so come svuotarlo.
Prendi un pezzo alla volta.
E dove lo metto?
Cancio, cavolo che è?
E lì, ok. Sì.
No.
Aspetta, forse ce la fa. Cazzo. Buongiorno. Sì, aspetta un attimo. Volevo solo cancellare i materiali che abbiamo presentato dal cestino e poi magari ci spostiamo.